What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today in the book of Deuteronomy, we're getting towards the end, and one of the things we're going to see is kind of the transfer of power. We're going to see how Moses transfers his leadership over to Joshua, and how Moses is going to end his ministry to these Israelites with a song. So, Deuteronomy chapter 31, Moses transfers all the power to Joshua. So that's what we see here. Joshua's going to go into the land, and Moses says to Joshua, don't be afraid. Okay, there's a lot to be afraid of if we're thinking about going into a land that we don't know, that we're supposed to capture and conquer. There's plenty to be afraid of, but Moses says, don't be afraid, be courageous, because God is with you. If you think of the whole time in the wilderness wanderings, what is the most important thing about these Israelites? Is it that they're strong? Is it that there's a lot of them? No, they were totally vulnerable. They were out in the middle of nowhere. They totally would have died unless God saved them and kept them and brought them in, which is exactly what he did. So what Moses says to Joshua is, don't be afraid, God is with you. That promise, God being with you, is such a comfort-giving promise that doesn't just apply to Joshua going into the land. It's true that it did apply then, but it also applies to us now, because the New Testament repeats this theme for us and says, don't be afraid because God is with you. Don't be afraid. Jesus says in the upper room discourse in John 14, 15, 16, don't be afraid because when I go, I'm going to send my Spirit to be with you. That we're going to live in concert and in harmony with the Spirit when we listen to his words and obey his rules and follow him with all of our hearts. So don't be afraid when you go into the land because God is with you. We need to take heart from that too, that God is with us as well. So chapter 32 is a song that Moses sings. It's a awesome song declaring how good God is. Verse 4 says, the rock, talking about God, not the rock, but the rock God, he and his ways are perfect, for all of his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without any iniquity, without any impurity, without any crookedness in him. Verse 9 says, the Lord's portion is Jacob, his allotted inheritance. He found him. God found Jacob, the people of Israel, in a desert land, and in a howling waste of a wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Talking about how much God cares for his people. And then what happened? What happened after God did so many good things to care for the Israelites? They sinned. They rebelled. They complained. God provided for them. They complained. God saved them out of Egypt. They complained about not being in Egypt. There was this constant battle and this friction between the Israelites and God because they kept disobeying God's rules. And basically, Moses wants to sing this song and remind these Israelites, just remember, your forefathers fought against God. Don't fight against God when you enter the land. Don't fight against him. Don't be a person who's always opposing him. Verse 17, check this out. It says, the sacrifices to demons, they sacrificed to demons. They were worshiping other gods that were no gods, to gods that they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God that gave you birth. And that is one of the big themes of Deuteronomy, isn't it? Don't forget. When you enter the land, don't forget. So it's important for us to remember as we see this, it's kind of the summary song of praise at the end of this book. What does Moses want the people to remember? Don't forget God. Do not forget God. We need to take that warning too. As you live your life today, don't forget God. Don't forget his goodness in the past. Don't forget his requirements now. Don't forget his promises for the future. Don't forget God. Don't forget God today. Okay, so let's move to the book of Luke. Brand new book that we're checking out here. The book of Luke in the New Testament. We are going to be in this book for a long time. This is the longest gospel, not in number of chapters, but in number of verses and in number of words. So this is the longest gospel that we have. Luke and Acts are the two big, longest books that we have in the New Testament, and they're written by the same person. So right here at the beginning, we understand that there's this person, this guy, who is writing to some other guy named Theophilus. And the person that's writing, we think, is Luke, Dr. Luke, who's mentioned as a physician in the letters of Paul. Also in the book of Acts, he's with Paul sometimes. So sometimes Luke says us, and when Paul's not with him, he doesn't say us. He says Paul and his companions. And then he includes himself in the story once he comes along. But he doesn't come along until in the middle of the book of Acts. So Luke is a doctor. Some people try to place when he wrote this. I think there's a good guess at this. We're not totally positive, but we think that he probably wrote this when Paul was in prison in Caesarea, up north in the land of Israel. Seems like they were traveling all over the Mediterranean world, but they settled into Caesarea for a time because Paul was in jail and he was basically being held so that he could testify about Jesus to the Roman and to the Herodian governors. So he's there. It gives Luke 2 years to interview people, to ask them questions, because what he says here is that he's creating an orderly account. So when we look at Luke, one of the cool things about it is we think it's probably the most chronological of all the Gospels. There are other Gospels that tell the story out of order. This seems to be perfectly chronological. It seems like that's what the Gospel of Luke is. So anyway, he gives us some background. And by the way, when I talk about the witnesses that he interviewed, he's doing this reporter style. So he's asking people questions, he's getting it all down, and then he's writing this long, orderly account. And I think one of the key witnesses that Luke talked to was Mary. And the reason I say that was, if it wasn't Mary, it was someone that was close to Mary, because there's so much that we find out here that is about how Mary feels and how Mary thinks right at the beginning of the gospel. Also, Luke is the only gospel writer that includes anything about really the birth of Jesus, anything about what happened before, what happened after, and also about the birth of John the Baptist. So that's what we start out by reading, that there's a guy named Zechariah who's a priest and a wife named Elizabeth, and they've been married for a long time, but they have no kids. It says they were old and advanced in years. And Zechariah was doing his service in the temple of God, and an angel visited him and said, hey, you're going to bear a son, and he's going to make the way plain for the Messiah to come. And he said, no, I don't believe that. I don't think that's possible. And when that happens, he's struck mute. He can't even talk because he did not believe the words of God. Then, in tomorrow's reading, we're going to find out about a teenage girl that when she's confronted with truth about from an angel about a son that she's going to give birth to, she believes. There's two different responses between these two people. And I think the big takeaway for us from the life of Zechariah and the mistake he makes here is we need to take God at his word. We need to trust him. Just like the book of Deuteronomy is all about not forgetting God and about seeing the mantle of leadership passed to Joshua to remember the word, we need to submit and obey the word whenever we hear it. When we hear the word, whether it's preached, whether it's when we read it in the morning, we need to take it to heart. So take this word to heart this morning or whenever you're watching this. You might be watching this at night. You might be watching it at lunchtime. I don't know when you're watching it. I watch these kind of things in the morning. So anyway, all right. Thanks for joining us for this DBR Snapshot. We'll see you back tomorrow for another one.